a courtroom, a judge, and an old man on trial. That day, everyone thought they knew who he was. When he walked in, dressed in worn-out clothes, leaning on his cane, most assumed he was just another defendant. But no one knew the truth. The judge mocked him, laughed at him, dismissed him as a nobody. But one phone call was about to change everything, because this old man was far more than he seemed. And with just one call, the justice system would be shaken, the balance of power flipped. Judge humiliates old man in court until he makes a phone call to his daughter. The truth will hit like a thunderclap, and nothing will ever be the same again. In Courtroom 5 of the Jefferson District Court, the ticking of the old wall clock echoed through the air. It had just struck 9. The crowded courtroom was filled with murmurs as people settled into their seats, some whispering about various cases, others waiting impatiently for their turn. Judge Samuel Carter, sitting at the bench, impatiently flipped through the case files in front of him. He adjusted his glasses and leaned slightly forward. His sharp gaze swept over the crowd in the courtroom. Known for his discipline and feared for his harsh rulings, he had no tolerance for weakness, excuses, or disrespect. The court clerk stood and read aloud, his voice resonating. The state versus Henry Collins. Charge, trespassing on private property. When the large doors of the courtroom swung open, everyone turned to look. Silence quickly turned to a different kind of tension. The defendant who entered didn't fit the profile of a typical criminal. Henry Collins. The elderly man stepped inside slowly, wearing an old but impeccably clean coat. He leaned slightly on his cane, his walk measured as though every step was deliberate. His tired but sharp eyes scanned the room. His white hair, deep wrinkles, and slightly hunched posture revealed his age. Whispers rose among the spectators. A few lawyers compared the defendant's file with the documents in their hands. Some shook their heads, while others exchanged puzzled glances. Who was this man? Why had he been found on private property? Judge Carter, surveying the old man, placed an amused smile on his face. What was this man doing here? Was he just another pitiful criminal who had crossed his path before? Or was he simply an elderly man who had had too much to drink and gotten lost? Sighing deeply, he spoke. Mr. Collins. His voice resonated in the courtroom. This is the second time you've been caught trespassing on private property. You've been to court for this before. Why repeat the same mistake after being warned the first time? Henry Collins lifted his head slightly and met the judge's gaze. He didn't seem like a frightened, defeated man. Your Honor, he said calmly. It wasn't a mistake for me. The silence in the courtroom deepened for a moment. The judge furrowed his brows. What do you mean? The elderly man leaned on his cane a bit more, took a deep breath, and continued. As you know, the Clearwater estate was open to the public for many years. I spent my childhood by that lake. My father was the gardener there. Every Sunday, we'd go there and fish together. Judge Carter sighed and closed the file. He had heard this kind of nostalgic story many times before. Criminals always had endless excuses. Mr. Collins, he said sternly, it is illegal to trespass on private property. What happened in the past doesn't matter. That place is no longer public. It's been sold. So, your being there is against the law. Henry smiled and nodded. I know, Your Honor. The judge's eyes narrowed. If you know, then why were you there? Henry shrugged slightly. Sometimes, you have to go back to see certain things. Whispers grew louder in the courtroom. The judge shifted uncomfortably in his seat. What was this old man implying? The judge slammed his hand on the bench. Don't distract me with your philosophy, Mr. Collins. Why did you go there? After a brief silence, Henry spoke. Because there's something you need to know, Your Honor. This response caused a small stir in the courtroom. Judge Carter quickly raised his hand, silencing the whispers. Though he didn't know what this old man was implying, he knew he had to remain in control. Mr. Collins, this is a courtroom. If you've broken the law, there will be consequences. He quickly flipped through the file and took off his glasses, placing them harshly on the table. So, where is your lawyer? He asked. Henry calmly shook his head. I don't need a lawyer. The judge raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Are you defending yourself? No, I'm not defending myself, Henry said, his voice so calm that a new silence fell over the courtroom. Judge Carter frowned. What was this old man up to? Mr. Collins, he said sharply, I don't understand why you're so relaxed. If you don't follow the rules, you'll face the consequences. What do you think the punishment will be for this case? Henry smiled faintly. Can I make a phone call? A murmur rose in the courtroom. Who was this old man? Who was he going to call? The judge leaned forward, hands on the bench, and spoke in a stern voice. Mr. Collins, you don't have the right to make a phone call in this courtroom. Henry squinted. If I'm going to serve 30 days in jail, at least I'd like to inform my daughter. At this sentence, the entire courtroom froze. Judge Carter paused for a moment, rolling his eyes. Fine, but let's end this nonsense quickly. Henry picked up the phone, dialed a number quickly, and spoke in a clear, steady voice. Catherine, it's time for you to come. Everyone in the courtroom looked at each other. Who was Catherine? And why was this man so calm? No one could quite understand what was happening. Judge Samuel Carter shook his head with an impatient expression. This elderly man was acting as though he were in the middle of some game. All right, Mr. Collins, he said coldly. If we're done with this little display, can we get back to your case? Henry nodded slightly, but said nothing. Just then, the doors of the courtroom swung open quickly. All eyes turned to the door. The person who entered was a woman whose wealth and power were apparent in every movement. She wore a long black coat, and the sound of her high heels echoed on the wooden floor. Behind her, two men in dark suits followed, each carrying a black leather briefcase. The woman walked straight to Henry Collins and gently touched his shoulder. Dad, are you all right? Everyone in the room was stunned. Catherine Collins, the CEO of Collins Holdings, the head of one of the country's largest investment firms. A murmur rose in the courtroom. Spectators whispered in astonishment. Judge Carter's face suddenly tightened. He knew that name. Catherine walked to the front of the courtroom, looking directly into the judge's eyes. Your Honor, I saw how you treated my father. Catherine placed a thick file on the table. The judge's face turned hard as he pressed his lips together. He didn't know where this was going, but he could feel he was losing control. Miss Collins, he said, trying to keep his voice as authoritative as possible. It's procedurally improper for you to appear suddenly in this court. If you wish to testify as a witness, you must follow the proper procedure. Catherine narrowed her eyes. Your Honor, this is not testimony, it's a reckoning. A slight hum rose in the room. Everyone realized they were no longer watching a regular case. Catherine opened the file and pulled out a document. Your Honor, I'd like to show you some truths about my father's financial situation. The judge's color drained. Catherine read aloud from the document. Henry Collins is the founder and honorary chairman of Collins Holdings. Suddenly, there was a stir in the courtroom. Spectators whispered in disbelief. Judge Carter cleared his throat and carefully examined the file. This couldn't be. Was this elderly man the founder of Collins Holdings? Henry Collins, a billionaire? And had he just humiliated him as if he were a poor beggar? The silence in the courtroom had become breathless. It was clear who Henry Collins truly was. Judge Carter, drenched in cold sweat, stared at the files, but he couldn't read a thing. To learn that the elderly man he had just humiliated was actually a billionaire businessman was devastating for him. But it wasn't over yet. Catherine fixed the judge with a hard stare and began to speak. I know what you're thinking, Your Honor, she said, her voice carrying unwavering seriousness. You thought my father had done something wrong. You underestimated him. But what I'm about to tell you will completely change the course of this case. A wave of curiosity spread through the room. Catherine pulled a document from her purse and handed it to the court officer. The officer hesitated but then walked it over to the judge. When Carter glanced at the document, his face drained of color. Catherine took a deep breath and made her bombshell revelation. This is the paperwork for the sale of the Clearwater estate. It shows that my father was in the process of purchasing this property. The courtroom erupted with sounds of astonishment. The judge adjusted his glasses in disbelief. What did you say? Catherine's gaze hardened even further. Yes, my father was in negotiations to buy this property. He wanted to visit the estate twice before the sale was finalized. It was the place where he spent his childhood, where his father worked, and a part of our family history. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. Catherine continued in a firm tone. My father visited this land twice to inspect it. During these visits, he was thrown out by security and reported to the police. Despite telling everyone that he was in the process of purchasing the estate, no one listened to him. Judge Carter's eyes widened. Was Henry Collins arrested for visiting a property he was about to buy? Catherine pulled out a second document from the file and placed it in front of the judge. These are the notarized documents confirming that the sale will go through. Even though we presented these documents before the case, My father was still not taken seriously. He tried to explain, but no one wanted to listen. You looked at his appearance, assumed he was poor, that he was a vagrant wandering around. The whispers in the room quickly turned into rising anger. Some lawyers shook their heads and talked amongst themselves. How could such a massive misunderstanding have happened? Judge Carter's breath caught. He felt his authority slipping away. Just minutes ago, he had spoken to this man in a condescending tone, and now he realized that Henry Collins had been dragged to court over a property he was in the process of buying. Catherine turned to her father, and anyone looking at her face could see that she was struggling to keep her anger in check. She turned back to the judge and delivered her harshest statement yet. Your Honor, not only did you bring my father here over a misunderstanding, but you also humiliated him, calling him poor. I will be suing you for this. Judge Carter's face drained even further. Catherine continued, her gaze never leaving the judges. After you make your decision about my father. The room fell completely silent. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a live example of one of the greatest issues in the justice system. It seemed that Henry Collins wasn't the one on trial anymore. Now, the real defendant was Judge Carter. The silence in the courtroom was sharp and heavy, like a knife cutting through the air. Judge Samuel Carter was shaken by Catherine Collins' words. Asterisk. I will sue you as soon as you make your decision about my father. Asterisk. That sentence had completely shattered the judge's authority. Just a few minutes ago, he had thought he was facing a defenseless, poor, and insignificant old man. Now, he had learned that Henry Collins was a billionaire businessman and had been dragged to court for visiting a property he was in the process of buying. And even worse, because he hadn't taken the Collins family seriously, they were now preparing to sue him. This could be the end of his career. Judge Carter leaned slightly forward in his chair, pulling out a handkerchief to wipe his sweat. Anyone watching could see that he no longer appeared as authoritative as before. A court officer cleared his throat lightly. Your Honor, you need to make a ruling on the defendant. Carter lifted his head and remained silent for a few seconds. Then, as if trying to gather himself, he took a deep breath. The court dismisses all charges against Henry Collins. Whispers rose from every corner of the courtroom. Carter raised his voice slightly. The defendant is found not guilty. Suddenly, a wave of hidden relief spread across the room. Henry Collins didn't move from his spot. His eyes were locked directly with the judge's. Finally, the judge turned to Henry and spoke reluctantly. Mr. Collins, I apologize for the time you've spent in this court. But there was no sign of satisfaction in Henry's eyes. Asterisk. Apologize. Asterisk. The old man said slowly. Asterisk. Your apology doesn't change what happened here, Your Honor. Asterisk. Catherine stepped in. Especially the fact that you humiliated my father for being poor. Judge Carter looked away. He realized that he had completely lost control of the situation. But Catherine wasn't finished. She was waiting to deliver the final blow that would shake the courtroom to its core. She pulled out another document from the file and placed it in front of the judge. And here's one last piece of information for you, Your Honor, she said, her voice as cold as ice. Judge Carter shakily opened the document. As his eyes scanned the lines, his face paled even more. What he read was a nightmare for him. Catherine, maintaining her calm demeanor, explained, Collins Holdings has been running a special justice fund to provide financial support to courts for the last 6 months. And what a coincidence. One of the biggest donors to this fund is none other than the Jefferson District Court. Shocked sounds rose from the courtroom. Catherine continued. In other words, Your Honor, even the bench you sit on is funded by my father's company. The judge's hands started to tremble. This was impossible. Catherine narrowed her eyes. And you had the audacity to humiliate a man like my father for being poor. Henry Collins took a deep breath, leaned on his cane, and stood up. His smile carried a deep wisdom and a slight hint of disappointment. You know, Your Honor, he said, I came here to see how justice works. The courtroom was completely silent. Henry shook his head, and what I saw didn't surprise me at all, because justice changes depending on how thick a man's wallet is. Then, slowly, he looked into the judge's eyes. But here's where you made your mistake. Judge Carter swallowed quietly. Henry lowered his head slightly and smiled. You thought I was poor. He paused for a moment before finishing his words. And at that moment, you stopped trying to understand who I really am. The courtroom was so still that no one dared to even breathe. This was no mere misunderstanding. This was the revelation of the corruption at the heart of the justice system. And now, everyone was aware of it. Catherine turned to her father and slowly slipped her arm through his. "Let's go now, Dad." Henry Collins stood tall and nodded. When the courtroom doors opened, it was clear the press was waiting outside. And that day, while one judge's career ended, a revolution had begun. Sometimes, a story is more than just a story. It's a lesson, a revelation, a reckoning. For new, gripping, and emotional stories every day, subscribe now. We uncover the truth, the justice, and the most shocking twists. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Hit that subscribe button and be the first to uncover the next big secret.